Dream Team, it's your boy D Neal back with another reaction video, guys. Here we are with Hitler's plans for the world if he won. I'm intrigued to see what this man would have had planned. I know it would have been absolutely awful. I mean, of course it would have been absolutely awful. Look what he did, like, in Germany. So, of course, the whole world war started because of this man. Before we jump in, make sure y'all subscribe, ring notification bell, get the video a thumbs up. Let's see what we got. I'm going to break this video into two different parts.
Adolf Hitler stands on the podium to great applause. His chaotic mind is racing as the crowd screams out, "Heil Hitler!" A crowd made up of not just Germans, but various nationalities that have fallen under his evil spell. The superpower of Germany is untouchable. There's no such thing as the Soviet Union anymore. The great of Great Britain is lying in the mud. Millions are being executed while millions more are enslaved in Hitler's labor camps. There's just one more thing to accomplish, and that's annihilating the USA, to subdue what Hitler regards as a low-down, dirty race of mongrels. He has won, and it's hell on earth for many. Look at around.
Just everybody in the USA. Everybody in the USA. A low-down, dirty race of mongrels. Okay.
Down to this standoff with the USA, but first we need to know how Hitler pulled it off. This unbelievable victory in Europe. Here we mix reality with fiction. As you know, at the start of the Second World War in 1939, Hitler's army, the Wehrmacht, devastated Poland. With its legion of panzer tanks and an incredibly efficient mobile infantry, the Poles were no match for the Germans. The attack was like lightning, which is what the word blitzkrieg was derived from. In September, German bombs were dropped on the town of Luck, not just destroying buildings, but even killing kids on their way to school. This sent a message of what was to come. The Polish pilot BJ...
That's legit. Like, how do you drop bombs on children, bro? Like, I don't understand how you could have the heart to do that, like, on children. And I know many, like, children are killed in war. It's absolutely awful. For anyone, not just children, to be killed. I hate seeing death in general. But I understand that war is a necessary evil. It just sucks.
Solak noted, "The stench of burning and a brown veil of smoke filled the air all around our town. No one was spared. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, rained hellfire down on Poland. Trains were seen derailed from the tracks. Kids screamed at the sight of the dead. It was a terror no one could have expected. And so on September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Amazingly, France was beaten in just 6 weeks, and in time, something worrying occurred. Surprisingly, most of the French accepted the new Vichy government, one sympathetic to Nazi ideology. Not many know that a large number of people in France endorsed Hitler's hatred toward the Jews. Bear this in mind as we go through this story today.
That's for real? That's... wow.
Time, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg had already been beaten by the Germans. It was as if the German soldiers were on steroids, which isn't far from the truth in the view of their heavy use of powerful methamphetamine, Pervitin. And with Norway defeated, Hitler now had access to heavy water. Although not known at the time, this is a key ingredient in the creation of the nuclear bomb. This was bad news. When France fell and the British were left scurrying for their lives on the escape from Dunkirk, it looked as though the Germans were totally invincible. These conquests so far meant tens of thousands of Germans killed and many more injured. France itself had lost 50,000 men in the invasion, Britain lost 11,000, but now Germany had a massive 1.5 million prisoners of war. It would have been much worse had the Brits not had their miracle at Dunkirk. Britain was at this point waiting for the Battle of Britain. It was a frightening thing to imagine. Not many people thought this small island nation could hold its own. But the fighting spirit still burned within Britain. As a wounded British soldier named Paul Ritchie said when he was flown back to England from France, he couldn't imagine his country going the same way France had. In his own words, he said, "With my mind still filled with the blast and flame that had shattered France, I was seized with utter disgust at the smug contentedness enjoyed behind the sea barrier. Still, he worried about what was around the corner." On June 18th, 1940, Winston Churchill...
F them French, man. F them French, man. Shout out to Britain, you know what I'm saying? All odds against them, Dak staked against them. They said, nah, we ain't going out like that. Not our fighting spirit. It ain't going that way, you feel me?
Spoke at the House of Commons. In his impeccable oratory style, he said, "I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life. He was probably right. Churchill went on, "Hitler knows he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age." He said that upon the defeat of Germany, men will say that this was their finest hour. And take note, he said Hitler would go after the USA. It was just a matter of time. According to this cigar-munching elitist who admittedly was drunk and drugged up half the time, still, he correctly envisioned the hell that Hitler would unleash. That's why Churchill was so against settling with Hitler. He was sure that at some point the furious Führer would have Britain in shackles and take over his empire. Hitler would not stop, not until Nazi ideology pervaded the globe. The Battle of Britain commenced. In the skies, British hawker...
I can't imagine an entire world full of this ideology, man. It's sickening to even think about. That would have been insane.
Hurricanes and Spitfires fought it out with the German Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The so-called dogfights were crazy, and many young pilots who went up did not come back down. Alive, anyway. Here is how one Spitfire pilot described a day at work. "We were both flying in a tight circle, just a little more and I'll have him. Pressing the trigger, I waited expectantly for the 109 to explode. I've hit his wing. He was one of the lucky ones. Life expectancy for an RAF pilot during the war was a grim thing indeed. 60% of operational airmen died, were injured, or became prisoners of war. Around 51% of all RAF aircrew died. Bombs from German Junkers rained down on strategic locations in England, with sirens blaring on a regular basis during what the Brits called the Blitz. It went on for 8 months. But the British down below were typically amenable to hardships. One woman wrote in her diary, "I wonder what the pilots feel. After all, somebody loves them even if they're Nazis." At some point, Hitler made the mistake of withdrawing aircraft for Russia's planned invasion in May 1941. That really was a mistake. It turned out the Germans lacked a cogent strategic plan. The planes also often missed their targets, and British scientists were good at reading German signals and jamming their radars. The British public showed fortitude too. A woman named Barbara Dixon wrote that she'd never even heard of Poland, but she'd do anything to repel the beast of Hitler, who she said was trying to blow us up or murder us in our beds. Historians say attacking Britain was one of the great blunders Germany made in the war, with the next one being the invasion of the Soviet Union. Had Hitler focused all his strength on Britain and not at one point said, "Okay, we'll come back for you later," the Brits might have settled with Germany. Many people in Britain wanted that. They didn't think Hitler was as crazy as he turned out to be. Hitler had many times expressed his liking for British culture.
What you mean? They didn't think he was as crazy as he turned. Oh, he must. I mean, you see that in a lot of movies and stuff, like with these serial killers and these psychopaths, dog, where it's like, when you talk to people, they like, it just seemed like a normal person. Or they were very charming. They were very sweet. I can't imagine. I can't believe that they would. Hey, that's exactly who it be. The people that you don't think it could possibly be the absolute psychopaths.
And he said, unlike those mongrels in America, Britain had a good Aryan culture. Prior to German propagandists criticizing the British for their empire's atrocities and their plutocrats living like kings while the working class lived in the slums, Hitler had some pretty good relations with certain British politicians. Britain's army was nothing compared to the German army, and no one really expected them to hold their own in the skies. Even the U.S. ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, said Britain had no chance. Despite 23,000 civilians dying and around 33,000 injured, with the German retreat, confidence was bolstered. It's thought 1,000 RAF planes were shot down, with about 544 fighter command pilots losing their lives. Then, with bombers and Coastal Guard losses, that added up to 1,542 planes lost and another 1,542 lives lost. The German Luftwaffe lost around 1,800 planes, and more than 2,500 pilots were killed. Across the pond, an American journalist wrote, Adolf Hitler met his first defeat in 8 years in what might go down in history as a battle as important as Waterloo or Gettysburg. Winston Churchill uttered those now famous words, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." This bolstered confidence in the US too, and elsewhere in the world. Germany wasn't invincible. It sent a strong message, and for Britain at the time, having the most powerful navy in the world, it knew no Germans would be walking down its streets anytime soon. But as we said, Hitler planned to come back for Britain just as soon as he'd taken care of other matters, namely the Soviet Union. The reason we spent some time on this matter is that had Britain been soundly beaten and backed down, the whole outcome of the war would have been different. With Britain out of the war, Germany could have focused less time on one very formidable foe in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. It would have also sent a strong message to the Soviet Union and to the United States. Remember, the US didn't want to get involved in a bloody European war. U.S. citizens didn't want their young men being shot to pieces far from its now incredibly industrious shores. But in
I
our
feel
alternative
that.
universe, let's say Germany did succeed in having air superiority over Britain. Germany might have launched Operation Sea Lion, the planned land invasion of Britain. This was not Hitler's first choice. He had been hoping for the British to accept his offer to back down out of the war. This is what Hitler had said he needed to happen for that invasion to be successful. First, he said the RAF had to be beaten down in its morale, and in fact that it can no longer display any appreciable aggressive force in opposition to the German crossing. Then he hoped the English Channel would be swept of mines, and if the British Navy was distracted with fighting in the North Sea and the Mediterranean, it would make crossing the Channel into England more achievable. Apparently, even Hitler's inner circle wasn't keen on this idea, and if you read the writings of contemporary historians, most will tell you he would have failed. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt suspected Hitler was just trying to bluff Britain into pulling out of the war. He said,
Oh, that British Navy must have been. That Navy must have been top tier, dog. They said, don't nobody want no smoke in this water. Don't nobody want no smoke in this water. You feel me?
that by God, even Napoleon failed to invade Britain. The place was a veritable fortress. The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, was no match for the British Navy. It ruled the waves, and it had done so for years. But in our scenario, Britain lost in the air. The morale of the military and the public was very low. The British Navy, as Hitler wanted, was spread out. The German Navy fought remarkably, better than expected, and before you could say Schadenfreude, the powerful British elites were foreseeing losing their empire while watching panzer tanks make a mess of that beautiful British grass. The country soon surrendered, just as France had. Now Britain was finished. Hitler could certainly win the war. With France and Britain subdued, and to our modern shame, many people in both countries were now buying into Hitler's Aryan rubbish, the Germans could now go full throttle at the Soviet Union. Okay, back to real life. Hitler had made a non-aggression.
That okay, back to real life, you feel me? That shout out to the Brits. It sounds like the Brits really saved the world, dog. The Brits, when they had Germany retreat, that battle right there, giving Hitler his first L, that changed everything about this war. So that's what I'm getting from this video. That changed everything about this war.
Pact with another tyrant, Joseph Stalin, but then he invaded Russia anyway. Never trust the word of a tyrant. The German army, full of confidence, was sure it would walk through Russia. They also said they were doing the right thing. As this 18-year-old German soldier named Henry Mettelman said, I accepted as natural that it was German duty for the good of humanity to impose our way of life on lower races and nations, who probably, because of their limited intelligence, would not quite understand what we were on about. Hitler hated Jews, but
I hate when they say because of their low intelligence wouldn't understand. No, they wouldn't understand because, like, people don't want to be killed. People don't want to be slaves. People don't want to be put in concentration camps. That's why they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand because they're not intelligent. And that's such a stupid thing to say.
But he was no fan of Slavs either. His notion that most Germans were pure Aryans was utter ridiculous, given centuries of the intermixing of people in Northern Europe. It was ridiculous, full stop. But even so, he was prepared to annihilate Slavish people. As for communists, once he'd won the war in Russia, they would either have to forfeit their ideology or die. The many millions of Jews in the Soviet Union would be hunted down and killed. As General Erich Heppner said, the war with Russia is a vital part of the German people's existence. It is the old fight of German against the Slav, the defense of the European culture against the Muscovite Asiatic flood, and the repulse of Jewish Bolshevism. So mark our words, the people of the Soviet Union would have been spared no quarter, or at least those that fit into Hitler described as the lower races. And while Joseph Stalin, by the time he died, had the blood of tens of millions of peoples on his paranoid hands, his zero tolerance to people not fighting was one reason why Germany couldn't defeat him. The Soviets killed around 300,000 of their own soldiers for refusing to fight, fighting badly, or going AWOL. People starved because of Stalin's focus on building weapons.
For refusing to fight, fighting badly, or going AWOL, you were killed. Germany would have had a very difficult time fighting against people who had no choice but to fight. It was like, I can't avoid this fight, or my own country gonna kill me. So it's you at that point. It's you and me. No other options. Jesus.
Weaponry above feeding his people. People even changed sides because they detested Stalin so much. But if he hadn't been so bloody despotic, Germany might well have won. For the invasion, Operation Barbarossa, Hitler deployed around 3.6 million troops, 2,700 aircraft, and 3,600 tanks, which was record-breaking in terms of European warfare. Stalin had 2.9 million troops, 8,000 aircraft, and 11,000 tanks, but the Germans were superior in terms of technology and general warfare. But let's think. If Germany had just defeated Britain in our fictional scenario, there would be a spring in the military step. They'd also be making use of that excellent British arms industry. For instance, in real life, Hitler had thousands of French prisoners of war slaving away in its munitions industry, plus around 650,000 French civilian laborers, not to mention the Vichy French fighting for Germany. Over in the USA, in real life again, many people didn't have much love for the Soviets. The famed American aviator Charles Lindbergh said at the time, "I would 100 times rather see my country ally herself with Britain or even Germany with all her faults than the cruelty, the godlessness, and the barbarism of the Soviet Union." There was more support for Nazism in the US than you might think. Hence, Philip Roth's alternative reality novel, The Plot Against America. The famed industrialist Henry Ford admired Nazi Germany, and he was, for much of his life, very much anti-Semitic.
Henry Ford admired? Nah, we got to stop looking up to these people who shared these ideologies, dog. Nah. I thought Henry Ford was a good dude because all his inventions and stuff. But if he admired Germany, dog, he admired Hitler's ideology, I can't F with the man.
Showcased in the anti-Semite books he published with titles such as The International Jew, The World's Foremost Problem. Back to our alternate reality. With the British loss and the USA hardly coming to the rescue, there is every chance that Germany could have won Russia, especially if its ally, for the short term anyway, was Japan, would also attack Russia. Just think, with Britain defeated, Japan wouldn't have to fight the country in Singapore, Hong Kong, and what were the Malaya and Burma. We also have to remember about the impact of all the countries of the British Empire that fought alongside Britain. Think about British India and the massive impact it had on the war, or India alone, whose 2.5 million troops fought under British command. Think about Canada, which couldn't have fought on since it was a dominion of the British Empire, or even Australia, who, although they didn't join the war effort right away, still provided the Brits with manpower and resources. We understand this is overly simplistic, and we haven't even discussed any country's atomic bomb research, but let's just say after Britain fell, the invasion of Russia went as Hitler planned. It was over within the year. This really could have happened had things just been a bit different. What would the USA be thinking now after much of Europe and some of Asia had fallen to Adolf Hitler and Japan?
You thinking we next? You think it's a wrap? You think we should have intervened sooner? Yeah. You thinking it ain't no way we could defeat the world?
We said Americans didn't want to fight a European war. William Kaplan, the then head of Harvard, said as much, one time stating, "Hitler's going to win. Let's be friends with him." Many people thought this way, of course. They weren't fully aware of Hitler's plans for world domination and the sheer ugliness of what he was capable of. Still, the US had meddled in the war by freezing assets and preventing Japan from getting the oil it needed to attempt to build its empire during the war, and Japan didn't much like this American interference. The US wasn't totally out of the war, lending weapons to Britain and helping in other ways, all for a price, of course. But then companies such as GM, Ford, and IBM also sold what was described as useful war materials to Germany. The US made hay while bombs spilled down on Europe, coming out of the war much richer. It might have stayed that way if Japan hadn't launched the famous attack. Japan had hoped that after attacking the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the US would revert to its isolationist policies. In our alternate reality, the US had watched on as Germany's Operation Barbarossa was successful and Britain and France were a spent force. In this case, had the Pearl Harbor attack happened, the US might well not have retaliated. But then, had history been different, the US might not have interfered one bit and the attack on Pearl Harbor wouldn't have happened in the first place. And that's how things are different in our alternate world. So, right now, Hitler's over the moon. The problem is he has enemies everywhere in his vanquished countries. This is why he's sending out death squads to hunt down the people he doesn't like. For this, he deploys mobile death squads, aka the Einsatzgruppen. They scour German-occupied Europe looking for their victims, and that...
Nah, this would have been absolutely insanity. We gotta stop it there, though, for part 1. We're gonna get to part 2 tomorrow, bro. Thank God for Britain. That's what I'm going to say right here and now. Thank God for Britain, dog. That's all we got. Make sure y'all subscribe. Ring notification bell. Get a video a thumbs up. It's your boy Neal. Out.